Okay, welcome to the third video on the Introduction to Programming series. So in this series, what we are doing is we're creating a bunch of projects with languages, the two languages, Java and Python. The first video was a project the second video was a project on Python. This video is going to be a project on Java. The project is essentially a random password generator, and this is going to be a little bit more complicated than the previous project because this one involves the creation of methods within the class, within the main class. It's not going to be creating methods or it's not going to be creating separate classes, but it's going to be creating methods within the main class. So there is going to be some new things in this video in this project. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and first create a string and call that password. And we'll just set that password string to be like nothing. It's going to be a empty string. But the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm going to be adding on characters to this string as we go on. So like concatenating or gluing together more and more characters to this password as we go on. And you'll see that happening. Next thing I need to do is actually need to import the ability to allow user input. So let's do that. Import java.util.scanner. Let me explain what this means because I don't want to just give it to you and just have you memorize it or something. Basically, this import statement is saying that it's going to import something. And here we have java. So it's kind of set up in a nice way. I like this, right? It's like java.util, which is the package, the util package, and then the scanner is the class that's located within that package. There are actually other classes as well, but the one we want to import is scanner. So that's pretty nice. That's essentially breaking down this statement here. In future Java videos potentially that we could make, we will be explaining the import statements so a little bit more detail.
You can also recall this import java.util.scanner in the last video in Python, in which we had to import random. And what importing random allowed us to do is that we had features of that library that we could use to our program. And so that's what we're doing in the case of this Java program. We have certain features. In this case, we have packages. And in that package, we're using a certain class that allows us to give features to use throughout our program.
Yep. Okay. So now that we have all of that, let's go ahead and allow user input. So what I can do is I need to create a scanner variable. This is something that you need to do in order to allow user input. You cannot allow user input if you don't have a scanner class variable. And so scanner scan equals new scanner system.in. This is how you do it. There's a lot of things going on here, but let me try to break it down as best I can. Basically, you imported a scanner class. Now that you have the class, you want to create a variable. And then the reason why you're creating a variable is because you can't call the methods without having a variable. The methods are not static. Can you define what static is?
So basically, static is a method just like the main method, which can be used and accessed by any class. And you can run that method without needing to create an object of the class in which the static method is located.
Yeah, exactly. So as Arnesh said, the scanner methods, however, that we're going to be using in order to allow for user input, they are not static. And so you actually need an object in order to access them. And so that's why we're creating an object here. And this is creating an object, new scanner. You're calling the constructor, which is going to construct the object for you. And then you're just saying system.in to allow for user input. This is, again, there's going to be separate videos on this topic for scanners, but this is just kind of a brief overview of it. Okay, now that we have the variable, let's allow for user input. So what I want to do is I want the user to input the number of characters that they want in the password. So I'm just going to call that int n and set that equal to scan dot next int. This is a method of the scanner class which allows for user input to input specifically an integer. It's not going to allow for anything else. So if you try to input like a double, which is a decimal, or if you try to input like a string, like a bunch of characters, it's gonna produce an error. So you don't want to do that. It has to be an integer. If you want, you can tell the user to say like print out or input a integer, but in this case, it's fine. We're just gonna assume that the user knows that or something. All right, next thing. So next thing we want to do is we want to use a while loop. So can you expand on what a while loop is?
So while loop, as you explained in the last video, is basically you have a finite loop in which you can loop some variable a certain amount of times, and you set a termination condition for when that loop should run till.
Yes. So here we'll be doing exactly that. We're going to be saying while n is less than or equal to 0. Oh, sorry, not less than or equal to 0. While n is greater than or equal to 0. That's what I wanted to say. So we're gonna assume that the user is gonna input something that's not 0. But even if it is 0, it's just gonna run through this code once. But we want the user to input something that is not 0. So like 1, 2, 3. It can be negative because you can have a negative number of characters in your password. So it's going to be while n is greater than or equal to 0. And now you need these brackets in order to determine where the while loop is going to start and end. And inside of that is the body. You need to actually include your code within there. Okay, so within this is where all the good stuff happens. Here you need to include a lot of calls to methods. As I said it earlier, we're going to be creating a bunch of methods. Now is the time to do that. Let's create some methods. Where do the methods go? Can you expand on that?
So we only have a main method, and in order to create a method for ourselves that we could use for our program, we can basically make a method for ourselves, just like how a function works in Python, in which we can create a certain function or method for ourselves that runs a certain or particular task. So the similar idea happens in Java, where we can create a certain method for ourselves in which you can run a certain task.
Yes,
But
exactly.
in order to actually run that method, we have to create it.
Yep. And that method is going to go within the main class in this case. So we can create the method. Let me just call it public static void. Now, actually, this is not going to be void. So can you explain the difference between void and non-void methods?
So basically, void methods mean that it doesn't return any value, while non-void methods, they return value. So
Yep.
for example, when you have a void method, you can't return like an integer. For example, if it's an integer method, you can return int, but you can print out certain statements, but you can't return values, and so that's what the difference is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if I wanted to create a method here, I'm actually going to be creating a method that is not a void method because we have to we have to get something from the method. So it's going to be a return method. And the return method is going to return a string. So you specify here in this position. So after static, you have to specify if it's a return or a non-return, which is a void method. Static is because you're going to be calling the method without creating as Arnesh mentioned earlier, calling the method without creating an actual object of the main class. So public static string, we'll call this method get string or something like that. And then the input is going to be nothing. There's no input. We don't need an input to call the method. So we can just leave it blank. Now this is going to be fun. This is just going to be getting a random string, okay, or a random letter rather, and we're going to send that in as a string. And so let's do that. We can input strings from the keyboard that we have. So there's a bunch of letters on our keyboard. It's gonna be hard to use all the letters. So let me just choose a couple of letters. I'm just gonna choose the letters Q, W, E, R, T, and Y. Okay, that's a total of six letters. So let's do that. If we wanted to first include Q, then what we would do is we would create a string s1, and we'll set that equal to Q. Now this is actually going to go within another loop. What this loop is doing is essentially it's going to randomly choose a number. So what I'll do is we now need a random class or a random method. So we have to import the class that allows for us to do that. That's actually going to be the math class. So it's going to be import java.lang.math. So now we can allow for users to input or for users to get a random number. So now that we have all of that, let's go ahead and create a variable that can store our random number. So we'll call that int r, which is equal to math.random. The math.random method is kind of weird. It's not as easy to implement as it was in Python. Here, it's math.random is just going to produce a number from 0 to 1. This is a decimal, but that's not what we want. We want a number either 1, 2, 3, or 4. And so let's go ahead and try to implement that. We have to first multiply this math.random by the number of letters that we potentially have. I said 6 earlier because QWERTY, but that's going to be kind of long, and so I decided that let's cut it short to just QWER. Okay, so that's just going to be 4. And then the first we can start at either 1 or 0. If we start at 0, we're going to have 0, 1, 2, 3. If we start at 1, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll just do 1. This is going to give you a decimal. We need to now cast it to an integer. So I'm just going to take this whole thing here and use a cast. This might all seem kind of new and kind of complicated, but don't worry. There's going to be more videos on Java specifically, so you can learn what all of this means.
Another thing that I also wanted to point out is that if you see in the import statements, after we imported that certain class, we had to end it with that semicolon. And you can see throughout this program, we're ending all our statements with semicolons. And here you can really start to see the differences between Python and Java. Where in Python, we didn't need to end our statements with semicolons, while in Java, you have to end your statements with semicolons. And so that's a main difference that you need to keep in mind when you're coding in different languages like Java and Python.
Yes. All right, so now let's use our if conditions. So we used this in a previous video. Can you expand on what an if condition is?
So if condition, basically like you can choose you can have a condition in which if it's like true, then you can run a certain statement. Otherwise, if it's not true, then it's not going to check that statements. So we can basically set a condition for like checking statements and if they're true or not. And so we can run a certain command based on those conditions.
Yeah. So we'll use those. So if we say if r is equal to 1, we're going to return q. And then we'll use an else if condition. An else if condition, can you expand on what an else if condition is?
So basically, as you see in the first if condition, you have if. And if that if condition is not true, then you can move on to the next condition. And else if is basically another condition we have in which it's basically carrying off of a previous if condition. So if the first if condition is not true, then it's going to move on to checking else if conditions. And so that's basically how you can use conditions to our program. So like you could check whether certain if conditions are true or false. And if they're false, they can move on to the next condition in order to check if that's true or false. And you can basically continue on that until you end your if conditions.
Yeah, it's kind of like a waterfall. So let's just do else if, and then r is equal to 2. And then we're just going to go ahead and return w. This is the same thing. It's going to keep on going. If it's equal to 3, and then we can return e. And the last one is going to be, what's the last one going to be? The last one's going to be an else. It's not going to be an else if anymore because we already had all our else ifs. So if it's none of the ones above, it's going to water flow down to the last else condition. And that's going to be, if none else is true, just return an r, right? That's it. This is essentially our complete method. This is going to return a number that is going to be, or not a number, rather a string, that character that's going to be either QWER or R. And so just typically in programs, we just like to end with a return. And if it's like an integer return, we just like do 0. Here, since it's a string, I'm just going to return an empty string just in case, to make sure that our method is happy. It's kind of what we, at least I'm used to doing. Okay, now that we're done with this, we need to actually create 2 more methods, but they're going to be shorter. They're not going to be as long as this one. So I'm going to quickly create them. So the next one's going to be a public static. It's going to return an integer. And it's going to be one of the numbers. I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, or 4. There's no input. So public static int, and I have to name it called, I'll just name it get int. Whoops.
And also, you can see these similarities in functions in Python, where you can provide parameters in a function, which means that if you provide that parameter, that function is going to read in that information and return that certain value. But you can also choose not to provide parameters. And that's the case here in Java. You don't, since you're not using any parameters here, you don't need to use in that information or return that certain information that you're passing in that public method you're creating.
Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to get our get int method. It's going to be this exact same format as the previous one, except instead of returning Q, W, E, or R, we're going to be returning 1, 2, 3, or 4. So I'm literally using the same variables. You might be thinking, if we use the same variables, isn't that not allowed? But if we use the same variables within different methods, then it's gonna be it's fine because it's local. This variable is local to that method. Can you explain what local versus global is?
So local basically applies to that certain method, while global is something that can be accessed by all or your whole program. So you need to make sure that you use the right variables that are not confusing to the user or whoever reads your program, so that you can make it clear. And in this case, we have local, so we need to make sure that we use the correct variables. Otherwise, global would make it confusing, and basically the whole program would be like global if you have a certain variable.
Okay, so now that I realize and I look through my code, I realize that I don't need all of these if conditions for this, because I can make it more space efficient and time efficient if I just go ahead and return R, because that's going to return a number from 1 to 4. That's all we need, right? Return R. Sometimes you're gonna see these fixes because you have a plan in your mind and you go as that plan, but sometimes there's gonna be simple things that you need to fix, and those simple things are just gonna make your whole life easier and faster. So yeah, let's return R. That's it. Okay, so these, for the sake of time, since this video is already getting really long, let's just keep it restricted to strings and numbers. Our password is obviously better, more strong in real life with extra characters like the pound key or like the dollar sign or like and ampersand. So there's so many different ones, but in this case, I think since due to time, we're just gonna restrict it to get string and get int, and honestly, that's fine. Okay, so now that we have this, what we're gonna do essentially is inside of this while loop, we're gonna be calling these methods randomly, and if we get a certain number, we're gonna be calling the get string. If we get a certain number, we're gonna be calling the get int, and then based on that, we're gonna be doing that a total of n times, and we're gonna be adding those strings or those integers onto the password each time. So let's do that. So, Arnesh, can you expand on your previous experiences building these kinds of programs?
Building these kinds of programs are kind of challenging at first, but like once you do it step by step, you're really able to understand a certain part of that problem. So it's better to go step by step rather than trying to have everything all around the place and understanding how everything works. So it's better to do it like one by one so that you have a better idea of what you need to do for that one step. And once you figured out how to tackle that one step, you can move on to the next step. And so that's how you should think when you're making these types of programs. You should go step by step rather than being all around the place and being confused how to implement certain solutions throughout the program. And so, yeah, that's basically what the experiences are when you're creating these types of programs.
Yes, that's definitely true. So, okay, now we have an integer. We're using again R, but it's fine because they're in different methods. And again, as Arnesh explained, the local global thing, it's fine. So we can go ahead and now call this method. So if R equals 0, let's go ahead and call the string method. Okay, so get string. What we'll do here is we'll go ahead and do password plus equals. So it's going to concatenate, it's going to add on to the string, plus equals, and then get string, and that's it. That's all we're going to do. So let me just explain what's going to happen. We're going to go ahead and go to the get string method, and then it's going to randomly generate a number. We're going to get one of these characters, and we're going to get that and add that into our password, and it's going to add it on. And now that we added it on, I just wanted to add this, use this continue keyword. Can you explain what the continue keyword does?
So continue basically means that if a certain part of that loop is incorrect, then it will just skip that certain part of the loop and move on, continue on to the next part of that loop.
Yeah, so that's one use. In this case, we're using it just to stop or to move on with the loop and not go with the rest of the code, because the rest of the code, what it's going to do, as you can probably guess, is it's just going to go password plus equals then the other method get int. So basically what I'm doing is if it's equal to 0, then password plus equals get string. If it's not equal to 0, if it's equal to the other number, which is going to be 1, then it'll be password plus equals get int. Okay, so just to let me just go ahead and check if everything's well. Once we have n is greater than or equal to 0, and then r is equal to int, and then r is equal to 0, we do this. Okay, so now that we have all of this, we have one more thing we have to do. We have to make sure that we decrement n each time, because otherwise this is going to be an infinite while loop, which is going to crash your computer and your program. So, well, it's going to crash your computer, and that's not good. Okay, so that's pretty much there. All we have to do. Our password is gonna be created. And what we can do finally is we can print out our password. So do you have anything to say about printing in Python versus Java?
So basically in Python, all you need to do to print out statements is that to your terminal is that you just simply need to type print, and then you have open and close parentheses and then quotation marks, and inside the quotation marks is what you want to print out to terminal. While in Java, you need to have a long print statement. So you need first start off with system.out, which basically means output. So you can output to your terminal, and print ln. So in this case, print ln means that it's going to print out the statement and go to a new line of code. We can also have print, but if you only have print, it's not going to output that statement and go to a new line of code. But we generally use print ln in order to, like, for example, if you need to print out 2 print statements in 2 different lines, then we can use ln for the first one, which means that it outputs that statement, goes to the next one, and outputs that next statement. So in that case, we have to also use a semicolon in the case of Java programs in order to print out statements.
Okay, so that's good. Here, actually, I could have used a print statement instead of println statement or println statement, because it doesn't matter. But I'm just used to using println versus print. It's gonna be fine here, but in some programs, it's better to use the println in a specific instance. Okay, so let's now try to run and see if we have any errors and anything we need to fix, or if the program just doesn't work in some cases. Okay, so here we say password. Okay, I see the error. So we have password plus equals get int, but get int is not a number or something. It's a method. So we have to make sure to add those 2 parentheses, set of parentheses. Let's try again. Okay, so it says unreachable statement. Okay, that's technically not an error. I don't know why it would give you an error for that one. But remember I said how I'm used to adding a blank return. We can delete that. It's not going to happen because we have this else statement. So regardless, it's going to go and return R. But you know, if that's not required, then we can remove it. Okay, so our code finally compiled, and so let's go ahead and so it's asking me to input a number. It's not asking me, but if it's not doing anything, that means I need to import a number. So my cursor is here. That's going to represent the length of the password. In this case, I'm just going to do a length of 3. So notice that even though we inputted a length of 3, for some reason, we got a password that is length 5. Let's try to see why. So let me go ahead and see why. So in int n is equal to scan.nextInt. So n is greater than or equal to 0. So we're going to iterate this 3 and then 2, 1, 0. So let me try to make this just n is greater than 0. See what happens then. So Arnesh, can you tell us about the whole process of debugging?
So the whole process of debugging is that when you run out your certain code and you find that some code doesn't work well, then you have to look at a certain part of that program in order to figure out how to debug your code. And debugging actually takes quite a long process. Like if you can't find a certain bug, it takes a lot of time to find where in your code is the bug. And in this case, we have quite 50 lines of code. So it's going to take a bit of time in order to actually find out where the bug is. And so debugging is really challenging process, and it is quite long. But once you get used to programming and all these debugging, making all these projects, you'll be more used to understanding how debugging works and where you can easily find where the bugs are in your program as well.
Exactly. Okay. Finally, I think I know what the error is. So notice that when I made it from greater than or equal to 0, I removed the equals, and now we have a password that's 4 characters long, even though I only specified 3. So what I'll just do is a simple fix is I'll make this n is greater than -1. And so if we can do that, maybe that will work. Maybe, we'll see. Okay, that did not work. The reason why that did not work is I shouldn't do 0. I should probably do 1 or -1. I should do 1. Oh no. Okay, I'm trying to, I think I'm making my program even worse by doing this. All right, let me try to make this n -1 is greater than 0. See what happens there. Okay, that works. Okay, good. So essentially, we fixed our program. Now we just subtracted the value by 1. So that way, we're going to have 1 less character that's added to our password. But one successful test does not mean that your program is going to be successful. Arnesh, can you expand on that topic?
So that is also what we wanted to cover in this video. We also wanted to introduce the topic of debugging, and say you want to find a solution to your program and you type out your code, you think it'll work, but when you actually run it and it outputs a different result, then that's where you start to go confused, and that's where you start to find out where exactly in your program is the error. And it does take time to solve this problem, but you can't exactly get everything on the first try. And that's like the realities when you're trying to make these projects or programs. It's not exactly going to be easy at first, but once you do more and more, you'll get more used to it, and you'll be able to find more easy fixes. And that's what we also wanted to demonstrate in this video, how long it can take to make these projects.
That's exactly true. So in this case, this is actually not a scripted video. So we don't have this code pre-written. So I wrote it on spot with just the thought that I had before making this video on how to make it. And so a lot of these things that I saw, these errors, I had to fix it on spot. And there's going to be times where even like here we fixed it, but there's going to be times where you can't even fix it because you're just stuck and you're going to spend the whole day trying to think about it, but you're still not going to get it. So then you sleep and then the next day you think about it. It could take sometimes even weeks if it's a really long program. So honestly, you just have to get used to being patient and trying to diligently trace through the code. It's called tracing through the code and seeing each line and seeing why there could be errors. So now let's just do some more practice tests. So I'll make a 5 character long, and
this is the common process you see when you start coding, is that when you think the solution is going to work, it's not actually going to work. So you have to definitely get used to it. And this is something that's not exactly easy. So you would think making your project could seem easy, but when you actually run it, it's going to output something different. So this is something you need to build muscle memory for, and also do more practice so you can have more foundation or more knowledge of the foundation and concepts, so that you can start to realize more of the difficulties and challenges of coding as you go along time to time.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So now that we have established this, let's go ahead and so I think I see one main critical issue with this program. The main critical issue is over here. This is why our lengths are all messed up. It's not because of the ends. The reason why is because we have if r is equal to 0. This is going to run regardless of other stuff. So, for example, if r is equal to if r is equal to 0, then our program's going to run, and it's gonna press the continue. So we could try and modify it, but for the purposes of this video, I think that the introduction to calling these methods, it would suffice to our purpose, because our program is working to create a randomly generated string for our password. So that's the project. Any final thoughts, Arnesh?
Yeah, so we really spent a lot of time making this. And though it randomly generates a password, we see that the length is different. So there are a lot of small things that you need to keep in mind when you're actually coding a project. Is that you'll see it does work, like functions were the way that the program should function should work, but the small things that you add, there's bound to be some errors here and there, and it can be really time taking and time consuming in order to find out where the error actually is. So that is what we want to really emphasize in this video, is that it's not easy to make these projects when you're going to be finding small errors throughout your program, and you can spend days and days trying to figure out where the error actually is.
Yes, that's definitely true. But for the purpose of this video, we just wanted to sort of demonstrate how to write a program. And we introduced a lot of new things here, like the random, returning methods, void methods, what they are, a lot of new classes and new methods in general, and a lot of new stuff. So it could be overwhelming at times, but over time you'll get better. And so that's essentially what you need to do. So practice more and more. Okay, so I hope you found this video helpful, and stay tuned for more future videos.
Goodbye.